There are rumors that feel loud, and then there are rumors that feel dangerous because of who they involve and what they imply. This is one of those moments. According to online claims, a so-called leaked tape began circulating quietly. Not publicly confirmed, not officially acknowledged, but specific enough to send shockwaves through one of reality TV's most volatile rivalries. And once the whispers reached Kandi Burruss, the tone of everything changed. Not because of what was proven, but because of what was suggested. The claims didn't just drag Todd Tucker into the conversation. They pulled in Porsha Williams, a name already loaded with history, tension, and unresolved public narratives. What followed, according to social media chatter, wasn't a calm clarification. It was chaos, sudden reactions, sharp words, old conflicts resurfacing at the worst possible moment. People began asking whether this was about truth or control, about betrayal or perception. No official statements confirmed any tape. No verified sources backed a pregnancy claim, but silence didn't cool the story, it heated it up. Because when allegations touch marriage, reputation, and long-standing rivalries, the internet doesn't wait for facts. It waits for reaction. And reaction, once it starts, rewrites everything that came before it. So the real question isn't whether a tape exists, it's why this rumor landed now, why these names are being linked again, and why, once this story broke, nothing felt contained anymore. This isn't a story about proof. It's a story about timing, history, and how fast unverified claims can turn tension into a firestorm before anyone gets a chance to speak. This story didn't begin with a video. It began with movement, a vague post, a blurred clip reference, a caption that hinted at more than it showed. That's how the so-called leak entered the conversation, without a source, without verification, but with just enough specificity to feel real. No platform hosted a confirmed tape. No outlet authenticated its existence. Yet the rumor traveled faster than proof ever could, and that's not accidental. Once a claim is framed as leaked, the burden of evidence flips. People stop asking to see it, they assume it was taken down, hidden, scrubbed. Absence becomes part of the myth, and in that absence, imagination fills the gaps. The amplification came next. Reaction pages, fan accounts, and gossip channels picked up the same talking points, each citing the other. Language stayed cautious, allegedly, rumored, unconfirmed, but presentation didn't. Thumbnails implied certainty. Captions implied urgency. And urgency is the fastest way to bypass skepticism. Then one detail changed everything. The moment Porsha Williams's name entered the narrative, the story stopped being random gossip and became history-dependent. Because this wasn't a new rivalry, this was a reopened one. Years of tension, misunderstandings, and public clashes meant the audience already had a script in their heads. When a rumor fits an existing narrative, people don't investigate, they recognize. They assume they've seen this movie before. That's why reactions escalated so quickly. According to online chatter, once the rumor reached Kandi Burruss, the situation intensified. Not because facts were confirmed, but because the implications struck at something deeper than gossip. Marriage, reputation, old wounds that never fully healed. At that point, the story stopped being about a tape. It became about provocation. People began watching Kandi's behavior closely. Tone shifts, subtle changes, any response, direct or indirect, was treated as evidence of reaction. Silence was read as restraint by some, as guilt by others. The audience split instantly. And then came the most dangerous element, retroactive interpretation. Old clips resurfaced, past arguments were recontextualized, casual comments from years ago were reframed as foreshadowing. None of it proved anything, but it felt convincing because it was familiar. That's how rumors harden. Meanwhile, Todd Tucker's name sat at the center of the storm, largely without comment. And that silence only added to speculation. Not because it confirmed anything, but because it left a vacuum. And vacuums online never stay empty. Another factor pushing the story forward was timing. This didn't surface during a quiet off-season. It surfaced when audiences were already primed for drama, when attention cycles were hungry for escalation. In that environment, even unverified claims can feel like breaking news. What's missing from all of this is confirmation. No verified tape, no authenticated leak, no statement validating a pregnancy claim. And yet the damage doesn't wait for proof. By the time the audience asks, "Is this real?" they've already absorbed the implication. The rumor has already shaped perception. And perception, once altered, is difficult to reverse even if the claim fades. This is why Porsha's name mattered so much, not because it proved anything, but because it activated memory. It reopened narratives people thought they understood. And once that happens, facts struggle to catch up. At this stage, the story isn't advancing on evidence. It's advancing on history, emotion, and association. And that's exactly when situations spiral fastest. Once the alleged leak rumor took hold, the conversation shifted again. It stopped being about whether a tape existed and became about how people reacted to the idea that it might. And that's where Kandi Burruss became the focal point. Online commentary began framing her response, real or perceived, as an explosion. But what does that actually mean in a space where every facial expression, caption, or absence is magnified? According to social media chatter, Kandi didn't issue a dramatic statement. There was no press conference, no emotional livestream. Instead, people pointed to behavioral cues, tone shifts, sharp replies. A sudden firmness that viewers interpreted as anger rather than control. In a digital environment, reaction doesn't need to be loud to be labeled wild. It just needs to deviate from expectation. And expectations around Kandi are rigid. She's long been seen as measured, strategic, the person who keeps her composure even when chaos is happening around her. So when the rumor touched something deeply personal, her marriage, her reputation, her past conflict with Porsha Williams, the audience expected either silence or a clean shutdown. What they perceived instead was defensiveness. Again, perception, not confirmation, did the work. Posts circulated claiming Kandi went off, that she attacked Porsha verbally. That old grievances resurfaced under the pressure of new allegations. But when those claims are examined closely, they rely heavily on interpretation rather than documented action. Screenshots are partial, clips are out of context, and timelines blur. This is how escalation narratives are built. One post suggests tension, another frames it as confrontation, a third escalates it into an attack. By the time the story reaches mainstream discussion, the language has hardened, even if the underlying events remain unverified. Porsha's role in this phase is critical. Her history with Kandi means any perceived reaction automatically gets filtered through years of unresolved rivalry. Audiences don't evaluate the present moment on its own. They stack it on top of the past. That stacking effect makes even restrained responses feel aggressive. And once a rivalry frame is activated, neutrality disappears. Supporters split instantly. One side interprets Kandi's behavior as justified defense. The other sees it as confirmation that the rumor hit a nerve. Neither interpretation requires proof, both thrive on emotion. Meanwhile, Todd Tucker remains largely absent from the conversation. That absence becomes its own narrative. Some interpret it as avoidance, others as legal caution. In reality, silence in moments like this often reflects advice, not admission. But online, silence rarely gets the benefit of nuance. Another accelerant was the use of charged language. Words like attack, wild, and exploded spread quickly because they suggest motion and drama. They promise action even when evidence is thin. And once those words are attached to a person, every subsequent moment gets read through that lens. This is why reaction became the story. The alleged tape didn't need to be proven. The pregnancy claim didn't need confirmation. The audience shifted focus to emotional response, because emotions feel more accessible than facts. You can debate behavior endlessly without ever resolving truth. That's also where the real damage happens. When reactions are judged without context, the person responding loses either way. Speak up and it's framed as guilt or aggression. Stay silent and it's framed as avoidance. In rivalries with long memory, every move is already loaded. At this stage, the narrative no longer belongs to the rumor itself. It belongs to how people think the rumor landed. And that's far more difficult to control. The moment Porsha Williams' name became central to this story, the narrative stopped being about a rumor and started being about history. Because history is louder than facts. Kandi and Porsha don't exist in the public eye as neutral figures to one another. Their past interactions, arguments, reconciliations, unresolved tension, have been archived, replayed, and reinterpreted for years. So when an unverified allegation surfaced that even hinted at Porsha's involvement, audiences didn't ask for confirmation. They reached for memory, and memory filled in the rest. This is why Porsha became the lightning rod. Not because evidence pointed to her, but because narratives already existed that made the rumor feel familiar. In online spaces, familiarity often substitutes for credibility. If a story fits an old pattern, people assume it must be true, even when nothing new supports it. Another factor is symbolism. Porsha has often been positioned as the emotional counterpart to Kandi's composure. Where Kandi is seen as controlled and strategic, Porsha is framed as reactive and expressive. Those labels aren't fair, but they're powerful. Once applied, they shape how every situation is interpreted. So when the alleged leak rumor circulated, Porsha became the emotional anchor of the story. People assumed reaction, they assumed confrontation, they assumed escalation even when none was confirmed. This is how narrative rewrites happen. Old clips resurfaced, past disagreements were reframed as foreshadowing. Moments that once seemed resolved were reintroduced as unfinished business. None of it added new information, but it created the illusion of continuity. As if the present rumor was simply the next chapter in a story everyone already knew. And that illusion is dangerous, because it removes the need for evidence. If people believe they understand the characters, they don't wait for proof. They interpret, they project, they fill gaps with expectation. Another reason Porsha's name carried so much weight is audience alignment. Rivalries create teams. Once teams exist, facts matter less than loyalty. Every action is filtered through bias. Screenshots are curated. Context is ignored. The goal becomes winning the narrative, not understanding it. Meanwhile, Kandi Burruss was placed in an impossible position. Any response risked validating the rumor. Any silence risked letting the rivalry narrative spiral unchecked. And in rivalries with long memory, restraint is rarely rewarded. This is why the story escalated without confirmation. Porsha didn't need to do anything for the spotlight to land on her. Being named, even indirectly, was enough. Once named, every silence, every unrelated post, every public appearance was treated as subtext. That's the cost of being a lightning rod. The irony is that none of this required a tape to exist. None of it required proof of a pregnancy. The narrative moved on association, history, and emotional recall alone. And once it reached that stage, it became self-sustaining. This is the most uncomfortable truth of all. Rivalries don't need new fuel to reignite, they just need timing. And the timing here was perfect for escalation. Which brings the story to its next phase, not the rumor itself, but what happens after the noise peaks. Because when narratives burn this hot, they don't end with answers. They end with consequences. By the time a story reaches this phase, it's no longer being driven by new information. It's being driven by containment, the alleged leak, the pregnancy rumor, the revived rivalry. None of these required confirmation to cause disruption. By now the damage, real or perceived, has already landed. So the question shifts from what happened to what do you do when a narrative won't slow down. For Kandi Burruss, damage control doesn't look like denial. It looks like restraint. Any public reaction risks giving the rumor more oxygen. Any emotional response risks being reframed as proof that the allegation hit close to home. Silence, while frustrating to observers, becomes the least volatile option, but silence has a cost. In the absence of clarity, people start reading into patterns, fewer appearances together, shifts in tone, selective engagement online. None of these things confirm anything, but they invite interpretation. And interpretation, once repeated, becomes narrative. For Porsha Williams, the cost is different. Being pulled into a rumor without evidence means defending against implication rather than accusation. That's harder because there's nothing concrete to rebut. Addressing it risks validating a claim that shouldn't exist in the first place. Ignoring it lets assumptions linger. This is the double bind of viral controversy. Speak and amplify, or stay quiet and let others decide what your silence means. Meanwhile, Todd Tucker's near-total absence from the conversation becomes its own subplot. Some read it as legal caution, others as avoidance. In reality, silence from someone named in a rumor often reflects advice, not admission. But online, nuance rarely survives. What's often overlooked is who actually loses in these cycles. It's not the gossip pages. It's not the reaction channels. It's the people whose names become permanently linked to unproven claims. Once a rumor reaches this scale, it doesn't disappear when interest fades. It becomes searchable. It resurfaces in future comment sections. It shadows unrelated news with remember when energy. Even if disproven, the association lingers. This is where damage control becomes long-term strategy rather than short-term response. Brands get cautious. Collaborators ask questions quietly. Opportunities aren't withdrawn dramatically, they're reconsidered silently. That's the hidden cost of rumor-driven narratives. They don't explode careers overnight. They erode confidence slowly. Another casualty is trust. Audiences become skeptical of official statements because they've been trained to believe silence means secrecy. At the same time, they distrust rumors, yet continue to share them. That contradiction fuels the cycle. Everyone claims to want facts, but attention rewards speculation. And speculation, once rewarded, multiplies. By this stage, the rumor itself almost doesn't matter. The rivalry narrative has been reactivated, old wounds have been reopened, lines have been drawn. Even if the claim fades, the tension remains. That's the real fallout, not confirmation, not denial, residual strain. The internet moves on quickly, but relationships don't reset at the same pace. Public perception doesn't snap back cleanly, and the people involved don't get to opt out of being associated with the moment. Which is why silence, as unsatisfying as it is, often remains the chosen path. It doesn't resolve anything, but it limits further spread. Over time, attention shifts, new controversies arise, the algorithm finds something else. But the mark stays, and that leads to the final stage of this story, not the rumor, but the lesson. By the time a story reaches this point, the truth is no longer the loudest thing in the room. Perception is. What unfolded here wasn't a confirmed scandal. It was a collision of implication, history, and timing. A rumor framed as a leak, a rivalry with a long memory, and silence that the internet rushed to translate into meaning. None of it required evidence to do damage, because damage doesn't wait for proof. For Kandi Burruss, restraint became the strategy. For Porsha Williams, being named was enough to become the lightning rod. And for Todd Tucker, silence turned into a storyline of its own. Different positions, same pressure. This is the uncomfortable lesson. Online narratives don't need confirmation to stick. They need familiar characters, charged language, and perfect timing. Once those elements align, speculation outruns verification and nuance gets flattened into certainty. Silence isn't always guilt. Reaction isn't always truth. And history isn't evidence, no matter how familiar it feels. What lingers after the noise fades isn't answers, it's residue, search results, side eyes, the quiet recalibration of how people read future moments. That's the real cost of rumor culture, slow erosion, not sudden collapse. So here's the question that matters. When implication becomes entertainment, who carries the consequences? When rivalry becomes a shortcut to belief, where does accountability live? And if proof arrives too late to undo perception, was truth ever the goal? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this if you think timing matters more than thumbnails. Because in the end, the loudest rumors don't prove anything. They reveal how power and perception actually work.